I'm on the Pingree Park Road, and I have a dead body.
They did find a body. What?
It was one clean cut very deeply into his neck. From left to right.
Scott, in our minds, was the victim of a random act of crime, which doesn't happen in Greeley.
The only thing that could have kept him from performing with us is if he was deathly ill or if, he wasn't with us anymore.
There was a surveillance camera, and that showed a man driving Scott's car. That was the mystery man. They knew it wasn't Scott.
We, at that point, found a Kevin Dean Eastman.
I've never even seen this dude you guys are calling Scott.
You took Scott up there, didn't you? You and Heather took Scott up there.
Kevin was in an on-again, off-again relationship with Heather. There was a domestic violence history between the two.
I believe it was her right side of her face was really beaten up, like really bad. It was black and blue. Her wrist had been broken.
She never called police to report him missing or dead. Everybody thought that she had something to do with this. She continued to go to work. She continued to go shopping, continued to get her nails done.
Let me help this man get to the bottom of this case. Please keep Heather safe.
Your wife is in a bar. You said she's unresponsive.
This is what he's going to tell you.
How to get out of that situation.
And I grabbed the gun.
Trying to find the first place to put a body.
No, sir.
The only thing they could do was kill him.
You want to say anything? We, the jury, and to find the defendant.
All right, y'all. We are the movers and shakers. Scott and Sessions on the Tomato.
What Scott brought was not only the amazing trumpet, but it was his character and his boyish humor. And Mr. Scott Sessions right here, ladies and gentlemen. He loved the fellowship that we had on stage. He just got caught up in the music, and the music actually just drives the beat.
There was always passion in everything Scott did, especially when it came to music. That was his love, that was his life.
He loved playing taps for veteran services.
Scott's love for God, Scott's love for country, Scott's love for people. When he played that rendition of Taps, you could tell it really came out in what he was feeling in his heart at the time that he played it.
Good afternoon, Greeley, Colorado. It is February 8th, 2020. We've got your evening forecast here for you now. If you're going out tonight, don't forget your winter coat because it's another
snowy February night in his hometown of Greeley, Colorado. Scott was set to be part of the band for an Elvis impersonator.
It was just getting closer and closer to showtime, and he wasn't there. And so, the show must go on, and, during halftime, we're all going, I wonder where Scott's at. Everybody's texting, everybody's calling, nothing going on. Knowing Scott, the only thing that could have kept him from performing with us is if he was deathly ill, or if, he wasn't with us anymore.
At the time it was snowing pretty consistently that morning. Our snowplow driver was driving in the area of Pingree Park, which is approximately 40 to 50 miles to the north.
I'm on the Pingree Park Road at the Monument Gulch exit, and I have a dead body.
Okay, we'll get help on the way. Are you able to provide any details?
Well, there was a tree on fire, and I went up to put it out. And he's laying next to it.
Okay, and do you believe he's got any help?
Yeah, he's definitely passed away.
It was the body of Scott Sessions.
Mr. Sessions' body was heavily burned. It was charred, wrapped in a blue blanket and some plastic, and it was secured with duct tape.
was crushing. It was very crushing. Scott was not somebody that had enemies. Scott was not somebody that people didn't like. Scott, in our minds, was the victim of a random act of crime, which doesn't happen in Greeley.
Now, bear in mind, I had a wife that was dying. I told her about Scotty was murdered, and her only response for the next 2 or 3 months she lived, who in the world would want to kill my Scotty? Who would do that to my Scotty?
At Scott's home, detectives found the password to access his last Facebook Messenger conversation.
And that was with a woman ultimately identified was Heather Frank.
Nobody even knew that he had a relationship with Heather Frank. Not his family, not his friends, not even his band members.
She was a waitress at Doug's Day Diner. She was known as a loving mother. She had 3 boys. She loved jazz music. She went to a lot of shows. We also knew that she had a history of alcohol abuse.
On Saturday, February 8th, Scott was making plans to see Heather.
This was the first major break in our case, was that he had gone to Heather Frank's house, and that was the last known contact. The second major break was when we found his vehicle parked in the King Soopers parking lot across the street from Heather's residence.
And that surveillance camera showed a man driving Scott's car and parking his car and getting out of the car and walking away from the car the day after Scott was murdered.
It was a little blurry. You couldn't make out a face, but you could tell that there was a subject that was wearing winter clothing and that he had gotten out and paid particular attention to the vehicle, walking around it several times. And when we found the vehicle, the floor mat was outside underneath the car, and the car was unlocked. The keys were in the ignition.
That was the mystery man. They knew it wasn't Scott.
We ended up putting up a surveillance camera on a light post in the cul-de-sac facing towards her apartment, and we, at that point, found a vehicle that belonged to Kevin Dean Eastman.
Kevin was in an on-again, off-again relationship with Heather. They found that there was an arrest warrant out of Denver Police Department where Kevin had abused Heather, and so they already knew that he had an arrest warrant. They found out that there was a domestic violence history between the two. He was an oil field worker. Everybody speaks highly of him. They think that he's a very nice guy. But when alcohol's involved for Kevin, things change.
Cell phone data indicated that Heather and Kevin were at the apartment when Scott arrived.
That was the last known contact that we had with Scott that night.
3 cell phones were pinging at that same address for a very long time. That tells us that all 3 were there, and since Scott is missing, that's the concern, that something happened at that address.
We started putting together a theory. The theory was either Kevin or Heather got him to her apartment to where he was ambushed.
The following morning, we had surveillance video that showed Kevin Eastman's car traveling to and from the area where the body was located. So we had them being the last people to likely see Scott alive, and then we had information connecting them to the body being dumped in the mountains.
The surveillance now on Heather's apartment was 24/7 as both she and Eastman came and went.
Heather was very much a suspect. She never called police to report him missing or dead. She went shopping. She got her nails done. She acted as though nothing had happened for several days after a man was brutally killed inside her home.
And reported on time at the diner where she worked.
Her boss noticed that she was definitely distraught and just not put together like she normally would be.
And ultimately, we applied for arrest warrants for first-degree murder for Kevin Eastman and Heather Frank.
The plan was to arrest both of them the following morning.
We had seen Heather walking out of the apartment carrying a coat. She appeared that she was unsteady on her feet, and Kevin was following right behind her. She voluntarily got into the passenger seat of Kevin's vehicle. They never returned. Early in the morning on the 16th, we realized that Kevin Eastman and Heather Frank had left her apartment about 5:30 the evening prior.
Police had put a tracker device on his car, and it showed Eastman drove out of town to a farm belonging to a friend, Troy Bennell. A sheriff's deputy was dispatched first thing the next morning.
He set up surveillance, used binoculars, and he saw that Kevin Eastman, he was able to positively identify him, was tending a burn pit. He followed him to a gas station.
And the detective was obviously wondering where Heather Frank was because she wasn't in the car.
And saw that he was filling up gas cans. And that's when he decided to make contact with Kevin Eastman and arrest him.
That's where he's got the water already set up there.
When he was arrested, he had a large knife on his person. He also had what they eventually find in his pockets were 2 spent .22 shell casings.
Okay. My name's Justin. I'm going to shake your hand, but nice to meet you. Sorry that you're in those handcuffs. Go ahead and have a seat for me. We were at that time still trying to figure out where Heather Frank was. Stuff like that. So when was the last time you actually saw Heather?
It was yesterday.
Okay. Did you guys do anything fun for the 14th for Valentine's Day?
No, because we had disagreement on the 13th. Yeah, but I asked her to marry me, and she said there's no way she can marry me.
Okay. How did that make you feel?
Deflated. Yeah, just like a worthless pile of shit.
At the beginning, he's playing it pretty cool. He's cooperative with the 2 detectives that were interviewing him.
So, the reason why we're here talking is because we have been looking at somebody's social media site, okay? And that person had contact with Heather last week, okay? And I'm sure that you've probably heard or seen stuff in the news about somebody disappearing from Greeley. Do you know anything about that?
Is it a musician?
Is it a musician? Yeah, he was a musician.
Yeah, Heather showed me that on her phone.
There's really a game of cat and mouse that begins being played by both parties, where he's trying to figure out what they know, and they're trying to withhold as much information as they can, but still progress the interview. And eventually they start disclosing to him more of the evidence that they had in their possession.
You got to remember that we got your vehicle on camera driving up Highway 14 going to the Hooter Canyon in a snowstorm. You took Scott up there, didn't you? You and Heather took Scott up there.
I've never even seen this dude. You guys are calling Scott.
Hey, Kevin, there's something else we know, too. Saturday night, you, Heather, and Scott were all at Heather's house. We know that. Okay, so why don't you walk us through what happened?
Tell us what happened with Scott.
Tell us about being there with Scott.
Yeah, we know that you were there.
I don't remember anything.
Here's the thing,
That dude named Scott.
Okay. So you're at this house with Heather, with Scott, the guy that you know she has slept with.
That would be awkward.
That would be very awkward. Tell us what happened there. You're with your person you proposed to a week later.
Right.
And Scott's there.
I don't even remember anybody named Scott. But I know.
Did you not know his name?
No, I don't know his name.
I don't think that you intended to go over there and hurt him. But it did. It happened. You went over there, you saw him, and you got upset. And things went bad from there.
I can't even remember being there, guys.
He claimed he wasn't at the scene, but then he started throwing out some other possible scenarios and hypotheticals. He's inferring that Heather Frank killed Scott Sessions the night before when Scott Sessions showed up for this date.
Okay, she told me that, she told him no, and he just kept going. And that he raped her. And I feel bad speaking ill of the dead. Right? Because that's not very polite. And I feel bad breaking her confidence.
Was Heather defending herself against this guy? You went over there, she freaked out, there was a mess, and being the devoted partner you are to her,
you helped her, didn't you?
You cleaned up Heather's mess.
It's okay.
Well, I know that I should love her a lot.
As the interrogation was underway, detectives carried out a search warrant on Troy Bunnell's ranch, looking for a possible murder weapon.
I don't know how these got like that, but it's okay. But
other detectives were searching Heather's apartment.
Mr. Easton actually gave us a challenge while we were there that says if our crime scene people were actually worth anything, they would find the blood.
If you guys' snacks are any good, they'll be able to find it for sure.
So there was a lot of blood there. Describe it to us.
It had to be someplace serious for that amount of blood.
Where was the blood at?
Everywhere.
That was a very strange statement. It puts Mr. Eastman there. It puts him in the crime scene. It was, it told me that he knew that this was a very violent crime.
Please, dear Father, let me help these men get to the bottom of this case. Please. Please, God. Please keep Heather safe.
We were still trying to figure out where Heather Frank was.
She had an arrest warrant out for her.
Everybody thought that she had something to do with this.
Detectives had worked into the evening hours, searching the property belonging to Troy Bunnell, and he was brought in for questioning.
I know it feels like I've been stalling for time here, and I have a little bit, because sometimes I get information that I'm not allowed to share, and I gotta wait until they let me share it.
Okay.
Everything was dark, but toward the end of the day,
they did find a body.
What?
Yes, sir.
With 2 gunshot wounds to the chest, wrapped in plastic and baling wire, underneath a pile of stuff that was scheduled to be burned.
They believe it's a female, so obviously you know what we're thinking. That it's Heather.
Jesus Christ!
In the other interrogation room with Kevin Eastman, detectives were also getting the word.
And you can see them getting information through their phones.
Maybe I was upset. I don't know.
So we found Heather. And Heather is in the same condition that Scott is.
All right, Kelly. Heather's dead. You know she's dead. Scott's dead.
Heather can't be dead.
You need to start talking to us.
He was upset that he thought that we were playing games with him.
That's not what to get fair.
Well,
God! I'm trying to get cool better, man. That's punching below the belt, guys. Give me a second.
Kevin, breathe. Okay. Hey, Kevin, pick your head up and breathe, okay? In and out. In through your nose and out through your mouth.
At Heather's apartment, the forensics team found the pool of blood, just as Eastman had predicted they would, after pulling back the carpeting and a black rubber mat.
There was so much blood that came from Scott's death that the blood soaked through the carpet, the padding, and into the surface wood of the floor.
And detectives believed the blood told the story of what happened.
Kevin probably hid behind the door, and as soon as Scott walked through, it was a surprise from behind. It was one clean cut very deeply into his neck. From left to right, and it spanned from all the way around to the back, right beside the spine on the right side. He was caught from behind and ambushed.
And detectives suspected that the messages Heather had sent to Scott were actually sent by Eastman using her phone.
You were setting this guy up. You were going to ambush him.
Why would I say him up? Why would I care? Because she's saying it, she's a whore. That's what she does.
She's having sex with him, and it was the final straw. You set this guy, Kevin, I'm just telling you what some people might say.
Right.
You set this guy up, you lured him to Heather's house. You killed him, okay?
And detectives discounted Eastman's claims that it was Heather who killed Scott Sessions.
We don't really know what Heather was doing. She may have been forced to watch. I don't think that she would have had the physical strength to commit the murder. I don't think it's likely.
But there was still suspicion about the role of Troy Bunnell in Heather's murder.
His DNA was found on a cigarette pack that was wrapped up with Heather Frank's body.
And Bunnell was evasive when detectives questioned him about what happened to Heather.
Okay. Well, and obviously we're trying to figure out how that body showed up on your property.
Me? Me? I don't even know this. I don't even know who this guy is. You know, I'm just not that guy.
Okay.
He had no motive or reason to want to kill Heather Frank, whereas Kevin Eastman did, namely that Heather was the witness to his murder of Scott Sessions, and therefore that she was the one that could turn him in.
We're not lying to you. Everything that we've talked about, we've told you is the truth.
And you know it's the truth.
Heather is dead. I think that we were just getting closer. He got to a point where he said,
"Can I get a lawyer?" I'm sorry, guys. Thank you. I'm sorry I let you down. My life's over no matter what, guys.
and we had to stop the interview at that point.
Larimer County investigators arrested Kevin Dean Eastman on Sunday. He was booked on suspicion of first-degree murder and tampering with a deceased human body.
That's when we realized it definitely wasn't a random act of crime. Scott was taken from this world in an act of jealousy, vengeance, hatred.
Kevin Dean Eastman is standing trial for the murders of both his ex-girlfriend, Heather Frank, and her love interest, Stanley Scott Sessions.
He was emotional for a lot of people. Everybody knew Scott either from high school or from music or from church, and that is just the small town feel that Greeley has always had.
And the prosecution may deliver their opening statement.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Power, control, coercion, and revenge. At its very core, this case is about domestic violence. These hands killed Scott Sessions and Heather Frank, wrapped their bodies in plastic, set one on fire, and was preparing to burn the other. These hands are the hands of the murderer. These are the hands of the defendant, Kevin Eastman. All the credible evidence in this case, all of it, will lead you to one person. It's a person you've already met, and that is the defendant, Kevin Eastman.
The prosecution's strongest physical evidence was the blood of Scott Sessions found on some of Kevin Eastman's clothing.
So that certainly helped connect him to the Scott Sessions murder.
And Eastman's DNA found on the baling wire used to wrap Heather's body.
And that was really significant.
But investigators could never definitively link the knife and the shell casings found in Eastman's possession to the two murders.
It was very much a large circumstantial evidence case. There were, some weapons that weren't found at all.
Does the defense wish to deliver an opening statement?
Yes, sir. An early hunch became an assumption on which this case was built. And that assumption was that Mr. Eastman was the type of person who was violent in the past with a partner, so he would be violent with anyone in the future. And that assumption was that he must have been so irately jealous that Miss Frank had moved on to someone new that he slit someone's throat and took life. But these assumptions, like most, were inaccurate and not based on actualities.
It was obvious that he was going to try and paint Heather as the killer of Scott Sessions.
Now, when Mr. Sessions' body was located at Pingree Park, they wanted to know who was it that wrapped Mr. Sessions' head in duct tape before his body was burned. And the DNA on that duct tape was Miss Frank's.
They painted a picture that Heather had killed Scott because Scott had raped her. The victim was being put on trial.
Over 2 years of investigation, and the government will still not be able to show you any murder weapon. They will not be able to tell you where Miss Frank was killed, and they will not be able to present you with any forensic or physical evidence that connects Mr. Eastman to either homicide. You will have doubts. You will have hesitations. And because you have those doubts, because you have those hesitations, the only verdict will be not guilty. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. McLaughlin.
Good morning.
Who is your mother?
Well, she was a beautiful lady.
What was her name?
Heather Frank.
Alex McLaughlin was called as a witness to the abuse his mother suffered at the hands of Kevin Eastman.
Mr. McLaughlin, how would you describe the nature of the relationship between your mother and the defendant while they were together?
I would say toxic.
Can you describe for the jury, first of all, what injuries that you saw on your mother?
When I seen her, she had a slash in her throat, like a knife, like a cut in her throat. I believe it was her right side of her face was really beaten up, like really bad. It was black and blue. Her wrist had been broken.
And do you know if your mother ever reported that incident?
Not that I don't think so.
A friend of Heather's, Anthony Velarde, recalled a text message he received from Eastman.
The messages pretty much said that he was married to Mrs. Frank, to leave her alone, or he was going to, can I say it?
Yes.
He was going to kill me. He was going to stab me in the face, in the neck. He was a roughneck. He worked in the oil field, blah, blah, blah.
And no one will find your body.
Correct.
The prosecution wanted the jury to understand why Heather never called police after Scott was killed.
Could Heather have saved Heather? Could Heather still be alive today had she notified police? Kevin may have been threatening to hurt her children. She was doing basically what she had to do in order to survive herself. And at some point, that didn't last anymore.
We are live in the Kevin Dean Eastman trial out in Colorado. On the stand right now is Troy Bonnell. Heather Frank's body was found on his property. So it becomes a question of what exactly was his involvement in all of this?
Let me advise the jurors that Mr. Bonnell has a pending criminal case.
One of the hard parts of the case was proving that it was Kevin Eastman that was responsible for shooting Heather Frank and not Troy Bonnell.
Did you have any involvement in Heather Frank's death?
No.
Did you have any involvement in wrapping up her body in plastic and baling wire?
No.
Did you have any involvement in moving her deceased body at any point?
No.
Ms. Devereaux, you're welcome to conduct cross-examination. Mr. Bonnell, you're still under oath, okay?
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Bonnell.
Good morning.
They beat him up pretty bad. He was impeached by a lot of his prior inconsistent statements.
And you told Detective Schall, quote, that you did not even know these people, referring to Mr. Eastman and Miss Frank.
Did not know what?
You said, and I quote, that you, quote, don't even know these people.
Correct.
And then his evasive answers when detectives asked him why his DNA was found on a cigarette pack next to Heather's body.
I had no explanation.
Right.
Other than...
No, I'm asking the questions, okay? You could never provide Detective Porter or Detective Geyer on that date an explanation.
No.
And they told you that this was a problem.
Okay. Yes.
They told you it was likely a problem that needed to be fixed because someone could use it to paint you as a suspect.
I don't recall that conversation.
Troy Bonnell was an easy target as an alternate suspect. He was involved in some shady things, and he had a significant prior criminal history that didn't paint him in a positive light, for sure.
You have been asked a lot of questions on cross-examination where you said you couldn't remember.
Yes.
Sir, did you have any reason to kill Scott Sessions on February 8th or February 9th?
No.
Were you involved in that death in any way?
No.
Or the cover-up of that death?
No.
Turning to 1 week later, February 15th into the 16th, did you have any reason to shoot Heather Frank twice in the chest?
No.
Were you involved in that act?
No.
Did you have any reason to cover up that murder?
No.
Kevin showed almost no emotion most time when during testimony. When he would walk into the courtroom, sometimes he would smile at his defense team, but he, for the most part, showed no emotion at all throughout the entire trial.
And the prosecution may deliver their closing argument.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This tragedy, this loss of life, had one common denominator. It was Kevin Eastman. And it was his actions, and his actions alone, that resulted in the deaths of Heather Frank and Scott Sessions. But they didn't just die. They were brutally murdered. One ambushed, one shot to the heart. Coincidence? No way. Every piece of incredible evidence in this case points to one reasonable conclusion. He is guilty of each and every one of these crimes. We'd ask that you return verdicts consistent with that finding. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the defense's closing, lawyer Ashley Morris presented an alternative theory of what happened.
He did not kill Mr. Sessions. He did not kill Miss Frank. Miss Frank killed Mr. Sessions, and Mr. Eastman helped in the aftermath, as did Mr. Bonnell. She took matters into her own hands. She made him pay for what he did to her. And then Mr. Bonnell panicked, and he killed Miss Frank, concealing her body on his property and concealing her death from Mr. Eastman. You may not like Mr. Eastman, and you don't have to. He certainly made mistakes. He's been abusive in the past, and he owns that. You don't have to condone what he did in the aftermath. You don't have to condone his prior abuse. But you cannot let these feelings interfere with your decision in the case. The prosecution has not been able to answer the essential questions in this case: the who, what, when, where, and how for each of these homicides. Therefore, I'm confident that you will find Mr. Eastman not guilty of killing Mr. Sessions and killing Miss Frank. Thank you.
Good afternoon. You're welcome to be seated.
I was sitting next to Scott's father in the courtroom when the verdict was delivered.
And as it relates to count number 1, murder in the first degree involving victim Stanley Scott Sessions, the verdict reads, we the jury find the defendant Kevin Dean Eastman guilty of murder in the first degree.
Stan fist pumped, and that was all he did. He just fist pumped, and then he bowed his head and he prayed.
As it relates to count number 2, murder in the first degree involving victim Heather Frank, the verdict reads as follows. We, the jury, find the defendant Kevin Dean Eastman guilty of murder in the first degree.
There was no reaction. He just sat there. There was no, he just sat there. He just sat there and stared at the judge as the judge read guilty after guilty after guilty, 7 different counts.
Thank you for your time.
You can't get any better than guilty on all counts.
All of the jury members came back for sentencing the next day, even though they had no role and they didn't have to show up, which is incredibly unusual.
I would like to start by inviting Stan Sessions up to the podium.
Stan Sessions is a pretty amazing man, and it was incredibly powerful. It was a statement truly from the heart.
But Scott's father also wanted to set the record straight.
Now, Scotty wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he loved his family. It pained my heart to hear the concocted story of him raping somebody. Never, ever, ever, ever in 54 years ever had a complaint like that in his life. He was not that kind of guy. Now, finally, I am truly a Christian man. Believe in the Gospels of Christ completely. With that, it's incumbent upon me the last 2 years to find a way to forgive this man for what he did. Because I don't want to carry his burden on my shoulders. I will not let him or anyone else determine my happiness for the rest of my life. So, Mr. Eastman, I have no quarrel with you. I hope and pray that you'll take advantage of the services of the prison system, that you will find God in your life, and that you will find a way to become a better person. I believe deeply in my heart that the right decisions were made. Thank you.
Mr. Session, on behalf of the state of Colorado, our condolences for the loss of your son.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My mom was more than just my mom. She was my best friend. The memories we had together I will cherish forever. I miss her every day. and will continue to miss her every day. And for that reason, I'm standing here today to say, Kevin, I have not forgiven you yet. I no longer have hate for you, just disappointment that you decided to do the unimaginable act that took not only my mother's life, but the life of Scott Sessions as well. I pray that one day you will come to the realization of what you've done. I would lastly like to say that my heart and prayers and condolences go out to the family and many friends of Scott Sessions. Thank you.
Alex, your mom would be proud of you.
Thank you.
And our condolences on behalf of the state of Colorado.
Thank you.
Scott Sessions was a gifted musician. Music was at the center of his life. And I would like to play a short video and wrap this case up on that note, if I may.
There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Everybody was crying.
It was a way to say, we honor you too, Scott, from his own lips.
Mr. Eastman, you don't have to say anything. Is there anything you would like to say?
Mr. Eastman does not wish to make a statement at this time. Thank you.
There is no death penalty in Colorado, and the only decision for the judge was whether to sentence Eastman to life with the possibility of parole or for his natural life, which means no parole.
You are going to spend the rest of your natural life in prison based on your vicious acts of violence, jealousy, and control, and the taking of 2 precious lives, and thereafter disposing of their deceased bodies in such a disrespectful manner. That's why you're going to spend the rest of your life in prison. We are in recess. Good luck to you.
All we could do here is lock him up, keep him away from ever doing it to anybody else here. But he's got his big trial coming. He's gonna have to meet his maker on this.